Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, is it a little apocalyptic to suggest that we're on the cusp of another civil war with a nation so deeply divided, not just about President Trump, but along cultural lines? One individual not only thinks it's not apocalyptic, that he's already assessing whether it'll be worse than the first Civil War. He's Harry Crocker III. He's the editorial vice president for Regnery Publishing and the author of the book Armstrong, The Custer of the West. His most recent column that sparked my interest in the American Spectator, America's Next Civil War Will Be Worse Than Our Last. Harry Crocker III joins us now. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So why is it a fait accompli that a civil war is in the offing, and why is it going to be worse?
Well, nothing is inevitable, but I think that let me put it this way. I've written a lot of books about the Civil War, and I would have to say our divisions now are in many ways worse than they were then. They're not geographic, which is a huge difference and potentially, in a way, a saving one. But while that could delay the setting of the fuse, the explosion could be worse because we're all sort of mixed together here in our cultural divisions. But if you think about, Lincoln famously said, "Look, we are people who read the same Bible, we worship the same God, we venerate the same Constitution, we venerate the same founding fathers," and all that was true. The Great Seal of the Confederacy had George Washington on it. The most quoted president, political philosopher of the Confederacy was Thomas Jefferson. I've just written a book about Custer, as you mentioned, and Custer, he was born in Ohio, raised in Michigan, served the Union, youngest general in the Union Army, a boy general at 23. He became a brigadier general. His best friends at West Point were Southerners. During the war, he crossed the battle lines to be essentially a best man at a Confederate officer's wedding, and flirted with the Southern belles afterwards. And he was all for reconciliation after the war. But all those things that brought people together, even during a horrific conflict that cost 600,000 lives, and in the South was a total war, a war that was waged also against civilians. Even the bitterness of all that was overcome in a way I think it'd be much harder to do today. And you can see it as simply as the war against Confederate statues or America's past as a whole. How is it that the very veterans of that bloody conflict could look with equanimity, could look even with approval on the erection of Confederate statues, all the way from Maryland out to where I'm from, San Diego? We have Confederate monuments out there.
Right, but why does it matter now? I mean, those Confederate statues have been up for decades.
Well, this is
centuries in some cases. But it was okay when Obama was in office, but now that Trump's in office, we've got to take them all down.
No, exactly, and I think there is a war on the past, which is not just a one-off thing. I think this is a war at its base driven by ideologues who want to, they know this. There's this old adage, I'm sure you've heard it before, he who controls the past controls the future. If you can convince people that America's past is one of unlimited oppression, racism, genocide, all these things, which incorporates not just Confederates, but as we've seen, it incorporates Washington and Jefferson because they were slave owners. It incorporates Stephen Austin, who the Austin in Texas might be renamed. Now they're talking about this in the council because he was a slaveholder. Yeah. You see it even with Custer. Custer, who fought for the Union, the fast food chain Sonic had to withdraw a commercial, a harmless, funny commercial, with him as a character in it because he's a genocidal Indian-killing maniac, allegedly, which is completely untrue, by the way. But this is the thing. If you can convince people that the past is all horrible, guess what? Then there's no reason not to remake the Constitution. There's no reason not to remake America. There's no reason not to embrace socialism, something different, because obviously capitalism and all the America's past was exploitive. And I think this is the great danger. I think too many people think, oh, those statues, oh, the history, who cares about that's the past. No. The past is our imagination. It's what binds us together. It is what, again, to quote Lincoln, it's our mystic cords of memory that hold this country together. And if you chop those apart, the big warning is if you look at and again I've written a lot of history books. Diversity in most societies is not a strength. It equals war. And when you have a whole entire party, the largest party in this country, the Democratic Party, pitting group against group on the basis of identity politics, that is not a recipe for harmony, peace, or reconciliation.
Yeah, but the approach that could stave off the Civil War is just appeasement and capitulation. That's what we've done on so many of these cultural touchstones. That's what we've done with respect to so many of these civic institutions, the college campus, the Fourth Estate, corporate C-suites. So if we just capitulate to the left, then we won't have to have this unfortunate Civil War.
Well, I think that actually is a lot of what the mainstream Republicans have bought that line. They bought that line. I don't think they think of it as capitulation, but they have actually bought. It's worse in a way. They have bought that the idea that the left actually has the proper definition of justice, and that really we need to slow things down. We can't be so radical, but really they're right about most of these issues ultimately, which is completely wrong. And I think this is whatever you want to criticize or praise President Trump. At least he has this. He is someone who does not let the media or establishment opinion or this capitulation chorus in the Republican Congress dictate what he's going to do, what he thinks, how he's going to approach these issues, which is an enormous strength. And I think you're right. The only way we will win this culture war is not by endlessly capitulating, but by recapturing a calm, kindly, generous appreciation of our past. And I think part of the problem is it's so many people now. They're so removed from the past, they think of it ideologically. So they get this crazy idea that, those Confederates, they were proto-Nazis. No, they weren't. I mean, it's partly just recapturing, as we can do through novels, like one I wrote just recently, or movies or television, about these were people in a historical circumstance living as Americans. I mean, Custer thought of the Confederates not as pro-Nazis, but as fellow Americans. Teddy Roosevelt said, look, we can take pride in the heroism of the boys in both blue and gray, both with fighting for the right as they saw it. If you grew up when I did in the 60s or even the 70s, you saw a countless diet of Westerns on TV, and almost invariably there was, this Confederate who had lost everything, who was still sort of a good guy making his way out west. Or you saw when Gone with the Wind came on national TV, and everybody in school watched it, and the girls read the book. And we all knew that this was a human story, not some sort of weird Soviet agitprop thing where there were fascists on one side and these somewhat better guys on the other, even though they were genocidal Indian fighters like Custer and Sheridan and company.
Well, so what's the evil that would spark the Civil War? I mean, Lincoln in his speech at Cooper Union made the point in making the case for war that you don't understand what the South wants. The South will not stop at peaceful coexistence. They will not stop until what we believe to be a moral evil, slavery, is recast as a moral good. We've capitulated on marriage. We were capitulating on gender. I know Ryan T. Anderson's written a book saying, we're not going to lose the kind of gender identity, gender redefinition, gender elimination debate and discussion. The culture's not ready for that. Well, I think we're losing. So if we're not going to get animated over the takeover of K through 12 and higher education, the arts, civic and other civic institutions, redefining marriage, redefining gender, then where's the line that shall not be crossed?
No, I actually agree with that 100%. In fact, I point out in that piece that back in 1860 and 1865, no one had any question what a man was or a woman was. No one had any question about what marriage was. If you cannot even define what a man or a woman is, if you cannot even define marriage as it's been defined throughout all of human history, you're in a bad place. And the left is in this position where they are defending things which are scientific, in terms of hard science, wrong. Just flat out untrue. They are defending things which in social science are wrong, flat out untrue. They are perpetuating myths about our history which are wrong, flat out untrue. And yet, you're right, our guys capitulate to them all the time. And I tried to tell people in the past that you may think this transsexual thing is some weird marginal issue that it doesn't have any effect on anybody, or gay marriage, same deal. No, because if you lose these sorts of fundamental issues that are basic, you could say common sense, or just plain old, Let me give you an example from 1950s TV. Remember George Burns and Gracie Allen? There's this
Amy does.
episode, yeah, where Gracie is going to be named Wife of the Year or something like that. And they say, "So Gracie, what makes for a great marriage?" And she says, "Well, first you have a man, and then you have a woman." And of course, the audience bursts out laughing because it's so manifestly obvious. Well, it's not obvious now, right? And I think that's sort of it's people need to be aware that we are in a completely bizarre point in history. This has never been done before. The French Revolution didn't do this. The Bolshevik Revolution didn't do this. We are, in some ways, making radical experiments that have never been done before, and whose, if you were to predict it on the basis of human experience, are going to be enormously harmful. Now, I mentioned I come from California. I should say you can see societies change within my lifetime dramatically. When I was growing up, California was Reagan country. Mm-hmm. And now look at it. It is, a place where Republicans almost dare not say their name. That's in a pretty short period of human history. There is no reason for me, having fled what was sort of Paradise Lost. I see Paradise Lost spreading all over this country. I live in Virginia now, and the same. I tell myself I've seen this movie before. The way that Virginia has changed from a red state into they say it's a purple state, but it's really a blue state. It's got a few hangers-on on our side, but there are multiple places we need to fight this battle. One is in teaching better history, which is hard to do when you've lost the schools.
Yes.
One is fighting in talk radio, but it's hard to do that when a lot of obviously the mainstream media is controlled by the left. And you've got to do it with popular culture, which is also hard because they control all the levers of popular culture. And I in my own small way, I've tried to do this through history. I've tried to do it now most recently with this book Armstrong, which is a novel, which is it's a great adventure story and all that. Somebody called it a dangerous book for dads. But it's meant to be funny too. It's a comic story, but it's a comic story with some real history behind it. Sort of page turner the dad can read and then give it to his son. But if we don't capture people's imagination, if we don't make them think about the past as, those are real people. Custer, he was a real hero. Those guys who fought for the South and that Custer actually liked, they were actually not as evil as they've been portrayed. And Custer, he didn't really hate Indians. He actually liked Indians. He liked these Indian scouts of his. And maybe remember some of the tragedy of history. Remember that the Civil War was the American Iliad, where you had good guys on both sides. Or Custer's Last Stand. Custer's Last Stand. Now some people think of it as, Custer had it coming. He was abusing the Indians. Finally got it handed to him. He's an arrogant SOB. Really? No. Custer was actually a great, brilliant tactician, was a major general by the end of the war, was a great leader of men, and dying with him at the Little Big Horn were two of his brothers, his young nephew, who was named after him, his brother-in-law, who was known as the Adonis of the 7th Cavalry because he was so handsome. I mean, it's really a tremendous tragedy, and people in the past, living much closer to that time, I guess, or still imbued with this idea of the conquest of the West, recognized it as such. And unfortunately, it's a typically neglected American great story that has been turned into an object of shame.
He is Harry Crocker III, editorial vice president for Regnery Publishing, the author of the book he was just describing, Armstrong, the Custer of the West. And you want to check out his column at the American Spectator. America's next civil war will be worse than our last. Harry, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great. My great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.